This video is brought to you by Hot Toys. The New York Times just dropped a really interesting interview in which J.J. Abrams admits that he's not good at endings and talks about why he accepted the crazy task of ending not only the sequel trilogy, but the entire Skywalker saga. This is something.
It's like the news, but for nerds.
What's up, everybody? It's Josh. Welcome back to the channel. Before we get into this, if you could do me a favor, if you're really excited for the Rise of Skywalker, chop like. And if you're kind of soured on the sequel trilogy and you're not really excited for episode 9, do me a favor, chop like anyway. Now, we're about a week away from the Rise of Skywalker 2, this crazy movie coming out, and Disney's been ramping up promotions with a lot of teaser trailers and social media trailers and things like that that actually look pretty dang cool. On top of that, JJ, the cast, Kathy Kennedy, and Michelle Rejwan have all been doing interviews. And just real quick side note, no disrespect meant, but every time I see Michelle Rejwan answering questions in an interview, I'm like, who are you again? But yeah, they've been doing a lot of press. Everybody involved with the film, and if you've been paying attention online, there have been some answers given in some of these interviews that people have not been crazy about. And in some ways, this is unfair. People are just taking answers that they're saying and holding it up as their definitive statements about different things. But on the other side of that coin, a lot of these answers haven't exactly been great either. And this article with the New York Times is really interesting. It's really in-depth. It clarifies some of the bad answers that have been given that pissed some people off, and it gives some answers that might piss more people off. I'm going to get into the most interesting things that I read in this article, but you can check out the full thing on nytimes.com. The number one most interesting thing in this article, and really the title and subject of the article, is all about how J.J. Abrams is not known for good endings, and yet took the job of ending not only this trilogy, but the entire Skywalker saga. And I think it's kind of refreshing because JJ gets pretty real here. It talks about how this is a thing and he knows what people think about him. I'm going to read right from the article a little bit here to show you what I mean. First of all, the title of the article is called The Battle for Star Wars, and the log line, or the first line after that, says, a creative shakeup, last minute rewrites, and a director not known for great endings. J.J. Abrams and company get real about the making of the Rise of Skywalker. Have you noticed how these big junkets that are normally pretty kind to Disney and Star Wars are starting to shift their narrative? And I know some people are like kind of upset about that or whatever, but it is a sign of something. The article goes on to say, J.J. Abrams knows what audiences think of him. I've never been great at endings, the filmmaker said just hours after delivering a finished version of Star Wars: The Rise of Skywalker. With some hesitation, Abrams added, I don't actually think I'm good at anything, but I know how to begin a story. Ending a story is tough. This is an unusual admission for Abrams, having just directed and co-written the Star Wars film that, when it opens December 20th, promises to be the final installment in a 9-movie narrative about the Skywalker clan. Moviegoers have seen the curtain come down on this saga twice already, with Return of the Jedi in 1983, which concluded with Luke Skywalker and his allies seemingly triumphant over the treacherous Empire, and again in 2005 with Revenge of the Sith, which tracked the final steps of Luke's father, Anakin, on his dark path to becoming the malevolent Darth Vader. But what seemed like closed history was reopened once more in 2015 when The Force Awakens began a third trilogy in which the old guard of the original Star Wars movies fought alongside a new generation of heroes and villains. True to his boast, Abrams, who after some trepidation directed and helped write the screenplay for that film, inaugurated this trilogy with considerable fanfare as The Force Awakens went on to gross more than $2 billion worldwide. It was the last and only Star Wars film he intended to make. J.J. Abrams is then quoted by saying, sticking this landing is one of the harder jobs that I could have taken, but that was why it felt worthy of saying yes. Now, actually, when J.J. was first announced to be the guy to coming back for 9, I was actually excited about this because I like The Force Awakens. This announcement did actually happen after The Last Jedi, and even though I'm on record of being a fan of that movie, there's a lot of stuff in there I don't like, and ultimately I think the choices by Ryan really left us where we are at now with the current state of Star Wars fandom, and so I was glad that we're sort of going back to JJ. I also made it a point to mention that I love it when someone has a chip on their shoulder. And JJ making The Force Awakens, it was sort of, praised at the time. It is sort of a soft reboot. I think some people have taken off the rose-colored glasses for that film, and they're like, there was nothing really great going on there. I still really love that movie, and I think it was a great start, right? It was a great start. As JJ said in the article, he's good at it. But the criticism that he probably got the most, and the one that I saw the most online, was about how it's really just a reboot. There's nothing really new in it. And I know that JJ obviously knows that he's doesn't have a reputation for being good at endings. And I thought, what a great opportunity for him to come back with this massive chip on his shoulder. He knows what Star Wars fans didn't like about that film. He knows the criticisms he has as a director. This is his chance to really solidify a great ending. Now, it's an incredible amount of pressure, and I believe the New York Times is sort of making the case that, like, why did Disney get the guy not known for good endings to end not just this trilogy and all of the movies? And that's a fair statement. But for me personally, for, as much as I do get on JJ here and there, and I thought some of his statements last week or the week before were ridiculous, I love when a dude has a chip on his shoulder and comes to play. And I was really excited about that kind of energy coming to this film. Now, they do talk about the process of making The Force Awakens and this whole trilogy a little bit in the New York Times article here, but it's really interesting because, of course, we know JJ didn't want to do this at all at first. He was very hesitant. He didn't want to touch something that he loved so much like Star Wars. Kathy got him to do it. Now, when they got to do it, The Force Awakens was like a hit the ground running sort of project because they had this end date. And they basically were like, we're going to make this movie. They got him. The casting was crazy. The scripting was crazy. They go away from Michael Arndt's stuff. They get Kasdan on there. JJ agrees to work on it and writing. The whole thing's very chaotic. And it was during casting that Kathleen Kennedy approaches JJ and is like, do you want to do the whole trilogy? And he was like, no freaking way. And basically it's implied by the statements and what we've heard from other sources that JJ was like, no way. This is already way too crazy. I can't possibly imagine doing this again and again. And, JJ being a business guy, he had a lot of other stuff he wanted to do. So this was a huge undertaking for him, and he expected it to be the last he would ever touch Star Wars. Now, here's a really interesting part where JJ sort of takes shots at The Last Jedi. Now, look, he's a company dude, right? He's going to say the right thing here, but this is kind of interesting, right? So what he says here is, he praised The Last Jedi for being full of surprises and subversion and all sorts of bold choices. On the other hand, he added, it's a bit of a meta approach to the story. I don't think that people go to see Star Wars to be told this doesn't matter. And for context, this was sort of based upon questions that were being asked about how Johnson's movie seemed to say the answers to the questions that JJ started to ask don't matter. And so you can see that that's kind of the way he's going with that. He talks about the pendulum swinging with these stories, over to Ryan's stuff and then now back to his stuff. And that's really interesting. But, that's about as close as you're ever going to get JJ to probably admitting how he actually feels about The Last Jedi. Again, he's just going to be a company guy. We got to read between the lines, and us dirty YouTubers can speculate and give the juice to it. He probably fucking hates that movie. Now, the article does talk about what happened with Colin Trevorrow in Episode 9, and I don't really want to get into it. They had creative differences. Obviously, Trevorrow wanted to go in a direction. Disney wanted to go in a direction. They couldn't seem to merge their visions, and this all has to do with some of the stuff that's coming out now from Jason about the Jack Thorne script and things that Trevorrow had in his original script. And a lot of it's all really wild and sort of kind of crazy to me. But either way, what this left JJ with when he decided to do Episode 9 was actually even less time than he had for The Force Awakens, and literally nothing. As he said in interviews before, he had nothing. No cast, no crew, no story. He had nothing. And so basically there's been a lot of talk about how this movie is a disaster and how they just stopped reshooting and, all these different narratives out there online. But if you've really been paying attention and you're not like trying to fit news into an agenda, it's pretty obvious that JJ always knew this movie was going to be a race to the finish line. He said this in multiple different interviews because when he accepted this task, they had even less time to do probably even more movie. And so, for them finishing up reshoots just a couple of weeks ago, and he admits that on Good Morning America, and everyone's like, whoa, they always knew that was going to be the case. And I think that there's been a lot of sort of drama surrounding this. I don't think this movie is a disaster behind the scenes, but it was definitely a tight package, and they definitely had to rush to it. But, I don't... So take that for what you will, but that's kind of explained in this article, but it's also been explained in other articles as well. Yeah, like right here, he says, I'm not saying it's like the closest that Star Wars will ever get to being live TV, he said, but it was not leisurely. Like, they knew that they were going to be accelerated from the beginning. And there are a couple of quotes here that sort of reiterate that this is just a JJ way of making movies. Like, people are like, oh, he's changing everything because they're trying to test audiences and they just want this perfect ending and it's not working. I think that that narrative's probably false. The truth is, JJ always makes movies like this. This is just his style. And here's a quote that explains it. He says, as we did on Force Awakens, while we're shooting, we're reconsidering things, changing some significant story points, going back to ideas that we had loved but put away. That process never stopped. Some people can say, oh, that sounds like it's crazy, JJ says. But when you have a better idea, it doesn't matter when it is, you have to try it. And I think particularly with all the context here that he's explaining about how he's just not that good at endings, and this is a big freaking deal to stick this landing, it just makes sense that they've had many different versions of this ending that they have tried. And I'm not going to get into the leaks themselves in this video, but I will sort of talk about the leaks in general as a thing, because we've just gotten new information that has even a new version of the ending. And we've heard different versions through leaks and rumors and stuff like that. And at the very least, it does look like they were making changes to the ending. The basic beats are there, but there's subtle little changes here and there. And honestly, as I've been kind of following the leaks, I've liked more and more what has been coming out. And if the version that came out yesterday from Jedi Paxis, which we did do a video on, if that version is real, it's definitely the best version yet. I don't think it's perfect, but it's the best version yet. And look, you can't be mad at this guy for doing this. At this point, this ending's super important. I mean, for them to call it the Rise, or for them to call it the end of the Skywalker Saga, that's audacious, right? That is ridiculous. That puts so much pressure on this movie. And look, it looks like they're at least taking it serious, and they've tried different things, and they're refining it as we go. So maybe not so much like doom and gloom, the sky is falling. This was more like the plan. They knew it was going to be crazy, and they've tried a lot of different things. And important to this article, this is a JJ thing. He was doing this on his other movies. He did this on The Force Awakens. It's more like par for the course than The Sky is Falling. Now, the article does then go on to talk about why even end the Skywalker Saga at all, and the answers given here are actually not that great. But before we get into that, a word from this video's sponsor. Guys, you know about Sideshow Collectibles and Hot Toys. They are very high-end, amazingly detailed, and beautiful figurines, action figures, and statues. I just got my Dark Side Anakin figure, and oh, baby, this thing is legit as hell. It lights up the room, literally, and is one of the perfect display things for your man cave or your own personal den of nerds. And when you go get your hot toy, make sure you use the link in the description below so that a little bit of the money comes to support this channel. Get the best pop culture figures and memorabilia that you can on the internet and help out the Den of Nerds at the same time. It's like a Christmas miracle. Check out some hot toys today. Do it. Okay, so why end the Skywalker Saga at all, right? I mean, that's the question that's on everybody's mind, and it's a question that was asked to a couple of different people, including JJ and Kathy. Well, when asked about this question, JJ gives an answer that sort of points back to George Lucas's feelings of symmetry. If each of the previous sets of films was its own trilogy, couldn't they all come together in a trilogy of trilogies? Could it go on, JJ asks? Of course it can go on, but there's something bold about saying that this is what the story should be. He also acknowledges that any great ending is a beginning of sorts as well, which is kind of cool, but he's sort of pushed on this and asked about, like, well, what will Star Wars look like totally separated from its foundational narrative with the Skywalkers? And he's like, look, I didn't design that, so I don't know. The article says it's Kennedy's responsibility to determine what comes after the final Skywalker saga, and as she put it, it doesn't have to end. But part of living up to Lucas's vision, she said, was looking beyond it. We're all custodians of something that George created, and we're trying to do the best we possibly can. She also adds it's important to recognize and honor what it is that he created and move on. I think we're ready to move on. Now, let's talk briefly about the future of Star Wars. Kathy mentions the success of The Mandalorian, how Jon Favreau and the show itself is just a great sort of way to spin out new creators, directors, and writers for the future of Star Wars. And we've talked about that a lot. I think that's really cool and it's good. There was also some mentioning of the cast themselves saying that, yeah, they would actually come back, which kind of runs counter to some answers they gave prior where they were like, not really interested in it, whatever. There was more of a sense of like, hey, if we get the band back together again eventually, I think, yes, that would be cool and we could do it. And as far as why end the Skywalker Saga, I'm super split on this. I'll just be real with you guys. I'm split on this. I honestly don't know if they needed to call this film The Rise of the Skywalker. I think by doing that, they opened themselves up to even more pressure. Now, on the one hand, I do agree that like it's time to move on. Like either way, whether you love the sequel trilogy, you hate the sequel trilogy, or you're somewhere in the middle, I think that like this trilogy is sort of like a butt end on the greatest trilogy of all time with the original movies. And it is interesting because this was probably the last chance we were going to get to have Mark, Carrie, and Harrison in these movies. And so it is sort of a continuation of that story. And I like that, but I do agree with Kathy when we're like, yeah, it's time to move on. Look, the people that really don't like this trilogy, they definitely want to move on. They're like, no, let's just move forward. And, they want to maybe forget all about this. The people that love the trilogy, maybe they are more apt to try to, continue this story and have more stories with these characters, which of course you can do if they're all surviving, right? So maybe it's not even an ending. But my honest opinion is like, those are not great answers, right? Those are not great answers. I'm not convinced that they needed to call this movie the end of the Skywalker Saga. And if they just continue the Skywalker Saga, it's going to feel really shallow. That's not going to feel good to me. But that's basically this article, guys, where JJ's talking about not being good at endings, and yet he's ending this whole thing, which is pretty wild. I'm going to go in and try to see this movie with as much of an open mind as I possibly can. I really hope that they do nail it, and if they nail it, I'll be like, dude, kudos, crazy good ending to the Skywalker Saga. But either way, we're moving forward. So I think like we're going to see episode 9, and then we're going to start to speculate about the future of Star Wars. And I think that's really the place where most of the fandom can come back together again, because we can just say like, okay, yeah, you like this, you don't like that. That's cool. But we're all excited about what will come next, right? So I think that's really the ticket for Star Wars. Clean slate. It'll be better for the brand. And that's pretty much my thoughts on this article, the answers, and where we're all at. We're about to see how JJ does this. You think he's going to pull it off? You think this movie's going to crash and burn? Whatever your thoughts are about this, let me know in the comment section below. And now let's shout out John Catandoy. Indeed, it was the Guavian Death Gang and Conja Club that Han Solo owed money to in The Force Awakens. So shout out to you, John. And now let's check the nerd card before we get out of here. I want to know what planet that has ties to the ancient Jedi was just confirmed in canon in the Dr. Aphra comic book. Answer that question in the comment section below. As I always say, I hope you're having an awesome and a nerdy day, and I'll see you in the next video.